Picture this. The woman who destroyed your marriage, who packed her bags, walked out the door, and moved straight into her lover's house, calls you 3 weeks later. Not to apologize, not to explain herself. She calls to ask you to sign a legal document that would make you financially responsible for her new life with him. That happened to me. My name is Marcus, and this is the story of how my soon-to-be ex-wife, Marisol, tried to use me one final time, and how her own affair partner ended up doing what I never could, showing her exactly what she was worth. By the end of this story, you'll understand why the 2 hardest words I've ever said, "Just know," became the most satisfying words of my entire life. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with everything, if you've ever laid awake wondering whether karma is real, you are going to love this one. This is a long story, so grab something to drink, get comfortable, hit that subscribe button, and let's get into it, because Marisol's story is about to get very, very satisfying. My name is Marcus. Before I tell you what happened, I want you to understand who I was before all of this, because the man at the end of the story is not the same man who started it. I've never been the type to raise my voice. Growing up, I watched my parents' marriage collapse under the weight of screaming matches and slammed doors, and I promised myself I'd never build a home like that. I wanted quiet. I wanted steady. I wanted a partner, not a battlefield. So when I met Marisol at 26, and she seemed calm, funny, ambitious, the kind of woman who made plans 5 years out and actually followed through on them, I thought I'd found exactly what I was looking for. We dated for 2 years before we married. I remember standing at the altar thinking I was the luckiest man in the room. I remember her father shaking my hand a little too hard and saying, "Take care of her." I remember thinking I will. Always. For the first few years, things were good. Not perfect, no marriages, but good. We built a life together. I worked hard. She worked hard, and slowly. We built the kind of stability I'd never had growing up. We bought a house. We got a dog, a scrappy little mutt with too much energy and not enough manners, and we named him Rocky. He became, without either of us saying it out loud, the emotional center of our home. I tell you all of this not to make you feel sorry for me, but so you understand. I wasn't a fool who ignored red flags for years. I was a man who built something real, with someone I believed was building it with me. It's strange how betrayal rarely announces itself. It doesn't kick the door down. It slips in quietly, through cracks so small you convince yourself you're imagining them. It started with her phone. Not hidden exactly, just angled away from me on the counter. Just a little too quick to lock the screen when I walked into the room. Small things. The kind of things you notice, and then immediately talk yourself out of noticing, because the alternative is too heavy to carry. Then it was her schedule. Girls' night became a phrase I heard more and more, except the nights got longer, and the group of girls got smaller and smaller in every story she told, until eventually it was just her and one particular friend, out until 2, 3 in the morning, catching up. Then it was the way she talked about her friends. Constantly, almost performatively. She'd bring them up at dinner, unprompted. How loyal they were, how much they'd do for her, how lucky she was to have people who truly understood her, in ways I apparently didn't. There was a lawyer friend, well-connected, always available. There was an artist friend with a house worth more than our entire street combined. And there was one name that came up a little too often, said a little too warmly, in a tone reserved for people who mean something more than a friend should at a man. Colombian, if I remember the details of how she described him. Someone she'd met through work, someone who just got her, in a way she'd never quite say out loud that I didn't. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself insecurity was poisoning something good. So I did what responsible adults are supposed to do when a marriage feels like it's drifting. I asked her to go to therapy with me. We tried everything. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this sounds from the outside. Like a man who saw the signs and did nothing. That's not what happened. I saw the signs and I fought for us with everything I had. Individual therapy, couples counseling, a psychiatrist at one point, when the stress of it all started manifesting as something physical, chest tightness, sleepless nights, a low hum of dread that never fully switched off. I sat in a beige office once a week and tried to build back trust in a woman who, I would later understand, had already made her choice long before I ever suspected anything. Looking back, I think some part of me always knew. But knowing and accepting are two very different things, and I wasn't ready to accept that the life I'd built, the house, the dog, the 5-year plans, might be standing on a foundation that had already cracked in half. There were nights during that period that I don't like to talk about. Nights where the weight of pretending everything was fine, while quietly suspecting everything was falling apart, got heavy enough that dark thoughts crept in that scared even me. I'm not ashamed to admit that now. I got help. I talked to someone. I got better. But I want you to understand the depth of what I was carrying, because it matters for what comes next. It's the reason no became the most powerful word I've ever said. 3 weeks before the events of the story, I finally stopped pretending. I hired a lawyer. I filed for divorce. And on a quiet Tuesday evening, I handed Marisol the papers myself, across our kitchen table, next to the coffee mugs we'd bought on our honeymoon. She did not take it well. Here's something important about where I live. There's a legal marriage structure available to couples who choose it, a full separation of property. Whatever you bring into the marriage, whatever you individually earn, stays entirely yours. No shared assets to divide. And critically, since we had no children, no path to meaningful alimony either. Marisol and I had signed exactly that kind of agreement, years earlier, back when we were young and in love, and neither of us imagined we'd ever need to think about what protection meant in a divorce. At the time, some of her friends had teased her about it. Why would you sign something like that? She used to laugh it off and say she trusted me completely. I believed her. I still think, in that specific moment, she meant it. But now, years later, that contract meant she had no legal claim to my house, my car, or any real ongoing support. And when her lawyer realized just how airtight it was, everything changed. Her attorney called mine directly, not to negotiate, but to threaten. He told my lawyer, in no uncertain terms, to make sure I never contacted Marisol again, that any communication from me would be used against me, that I should be very careful about how this played out. What he didn't know was that my lawyer doesn't respond to intimidation. My lawyer responds to leverage, and thanks to a contract signed years earlier in good faith by two people who trusted each other, I had all the leverage in the room. My lawyer let the threats bounce off him without so much as a raised eyebrow, and simply said, "We'll proceed according to the contract they both signed." Marisol stalled everything she could, delayed paperwork, missed deadlines accidentally. Every trick a desperate person reaches for when the ground is shifting under them and they realize, for the first time, that they might not land on their feet. And then, 2 weeks before the story truly begins, she did something that still surprises me when I think about it. She moved out, not to a neutral space, not to a friend's guest room, while things settled. She moved directly into her affair partner's house. She even brought her father along on the day she came to collect some of her things. I assumed to intimidate me, to make the moment feel heavier, more official, more one-sided. I stood in the doorway of the home I had built with my own hands and told her father calmly that he was not welcome to escalate anything under my roof, and that I would call the police the second I felt even the smallest legal or physical threat. He backed off almost immediately. Some men only push as hard as they think they can get away with. She left that day with several boxes. The only thing she took that actually mattered to me was Rocky, our dog, the one steady, uncomplicated source of loyalty either of us had left in that house. A few days after she moved out, Marisol came back one more time to collect the last of Rocky's things, his bed, his leash, the little collection of toys scattered around what used to be our living room. She stood in the doorway, and before she left, she looked me directly in the eye and said something that still makes my jaw tighten when I think about it. "I fought for our relationship, Marcus. I gave you so many opportunities." I let that sentence sit in the air for a moment before I answered, because I wanted to make sure my voice stayed level. "You didn't have to give me opportunities," I said. "You only ever needed to do one thing. Cut every tie with him. That's it. That's the whole list." She didn't answer. There's a complicated detail underneath all of this that I'm still not ready to share publicly, something that made cutting ties more complicated than it should have been. But the short version is simple. She couldn't do it. Or she wouldn't. Either way, she chose him again, silently, standing in the doorway of the house we used to call home, without saying a single word in her own defense. She turned around and left. I closed the door behind her. And for 2 weeks, there was nothing. Just silence, and a house that suddenly felt too big for one person, and one very confused dog. 3 days ago, everything changed again. Marisol's lawyer had given her one explicit instruction throughout this entire process: no direct contact with me, under any circumstances. Every conversation was supposed to go through the lawyers. It was the one boundary that had actually held for 3 full weeks. She broke it herself, with a single message that landed on my phone late on a Tuesday night. She needed a favor. Where I live, renting an apartment often requires something called a solidary debtor, a guarantor, essentially, but a serious one. This isn't a quick reference check. It requires someone with a fully paid-off property who legally guarantees the lease. If the tenant fails to pay, the landlord can pursue the guarantor's own property to cover the debt. It's not a favor you ask a stranger for. It's not really a favor you ask an ex-spouse mid-divorce for either. It's the kind of thing you ask someone who trusts you completely, someone whose future you'd never dream of gambling with. Marisol was asking me, the man she had cheated on, the man she had left in favor of someone else, the man whose divorce papers she was actively stalling in court, to put my house, my financial future, my entire life on the line, so she could sign a lease with her affair partner's landlord. Why the sudden urgency? Because things at her new home weren't going well. Her affair partner, it turned out, couldn't stand Rocky. There were details I only pieced together later. Someone had accidentally left a door open, and Rocky had gotten out, and there'd been a frantic, chaotic scramble to find him before anything worse happened. Whatever the full story was, the result was clear. They needed a new place, fast, and Marisol had absolutely no one left willing to vouch for her. I read her message twice, sitting alone at my kitchen table, in the same seat where I'd handed her divorce papers 3 weeks earlier. Then I typed back 2 words. No. I didn't add an explanation. I didn't soften it. I set the phone down, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The next evening, she called. Her voice was different this time. Smaller, less certain than the woman who had stood in my doorway telling me how hard she'd fought for us. There was an edge of real desperation in it now. "Why won't you help me?" she asked. "After everything?" I let her finish. I let the silence stretch out after her question, just long enough that she'd know I wasn't going to fill it with an apology. And then I gave her the truth, calmly, without raising my voice, because I'd learned a long time ago that you don't need volume for words to land like a blow. "You're not my responsibility anymore," I said. "You made that choice. You walked out that door and into his house. So where is he right now? The man who flies all over the world, the one who told you he'd always be there. Why isn't he signing? Where's your artist friend? The one with the $3 million house you used to talk about at every dinner? Where are your 2 lawyer friends, the ones pulling in 7 figures a year? Who told you they were available for anything you ever needed?" Silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing change. "They're not signing," I continued, "because they know exactly what your word is worth. I know it too. I learned it 3 weeks ago, sitting at our kitchen table. If I have to get a court order to force you to pay your share of the house we bought together, I will. And not one of those friends is going to take on a debt for you either. They'll let you vent. They'll pour you a glass of wine and tell you how sorry they are. But none of them are putting their name on a lease for you. Because unlike me, 3 years ago, standing at an altar promising forever, they've never actually trusted you with anything that mattered." She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, quietly, almost like she didn't mean for me to hear it, "I don't know what to do." "That's not my problem anymore," I said, and I meant it. She hung up without another word. Within the hour, her social media exploded, a rapid string of public posts, half in English, half in her first language, calling me insensitive, a cheater, abusive. Whatever narrative would make her the victim in the eyes of anyone watching, she posted it, one after another, each one a little more dramatic than the last. I understand why some people watching this might expect me to have fired back with my own public statement, laying out every detail, letting the internet decide who was right. I didn't. I didn't need an audience to know the truth. I posted exactly one thing, addressed to no one by name, nothing that could be quoted back to me in court, with a single caption underneath it. But hurt. She wouldn't fully grasp the tone of that word. English isn't her first language, and slang like that doesn't always translate. But I knew somehow that she'd feel the weight of it anyway. And within minutes, a mutual friend confirmed it. She had, in her words, gone quiet after that one. In the days that followed, I heard pieces of the aftermath, the way you always do after something like this, through mutual friends, through the occasional slip in a lawyer's email, through the kind of small-town whisper network that exists no matter how big the city actually is. Marisol was still without a permanent place to stay. Her affair partner, the man she'd left everything for, had made it clear he had no interest in taking on legal or financial responsibility for her housing situation, which, if I'm honest, told me everything I needed to know about the foundation of that relationship. Her artist friend offered emotional support, but drew a hard line at anything involving her own property. Her high-earning lawyer friends, so generous with their words over the years, discovered they had remarkably little appetite for actual financial risk on her behalf. And Rocky, our dog, the one steady, uncomplicated, loyal presence through every version of this story, came home to me for good. No custody arrangement, no visitation schedule, just a dog who, given the choice, chose the person who had never once made him feel like an inconvenience. Here's where this story really lands, and here's why it feels like justice instead of cruelty. Marisol spent years building an entire safety net out of people she was certain would always catch her. Me first, because I always had before. Then her wealthy, well-connected friends, who she talked about constantly, like trophies. Then, finally, her affair partner, the man she chose over an entire marriage. But the moment she actually needed one of them to put something real on the line, their name, their property, their own risk, every single one of them quietly stepped back. Not with dramatic confrontations, not with big speeches, just silence and excuses and sudden unavailability. Her affair partner couldn't even tolerate her dog, let alone her problems. Her millionaire friends, so free with kind words at dinner parties, wouldn't sign a single legal document. And me, the person she was certain would always bail her out, because I always had, right up until the day I finally stopped, closed that door calmly, quietly, and for good. As of this story, she's still without stable housing, still leaning on people who have gradually stopped answering her calls. And Rocky is home, safe, loved, exactly where he always belonged. I'll leave you with the same words I left for her, on a post she'll probably never fully understand. Marisol, if you ever read this, I hope you eventually find peace. But more than that, I hope you understand that Rocky was always loved more honestly, by more people, than you ever let yourself be honest enough to deserve. That there's a strange, quiet kind of karma that doesn't need anyone's help to arrive. It doesn't need a shouting match. It doesn't need a public takedown or a viral post. Sometimes it just needs one honest word. No. And the willingness to step back and watch as the people someone spent years taking for granted finally show their true colors, all at once, right when it matters most. I didn't destroy Marisol's life. I simply stopped rescuing her from the consequences of the one she'd already chosen for herself. If this story hit you right in the chest, smash that like button and let me know in the comments. What's the most satisfying no you've ever said to someone who didn't deserve your help? And if you want more stories exactly like Marcus's, hit subscribe now, because karma, it turns out, always has a few more chapters left to tell.